Hello, and welcome to my 31st October. I'm Lucky27, and this is a series of stories I have often told about my life. Today's story is entitled Cautionary Ghost Stories. There's a phenomenon that occurs in small towns versus large towns that has to do with making up ghost stories to keep children from doing dumb things. I'm not saying this only happens in small towns, but I've only ever seen it happen in the smaller communities I've lived in versus the larger ones. I'm going to give you 5 stories that I can remember from my childhood as well as the one that I was turned into to explain. The first time I came across this was when I was in maybe the 1st grade. I lived on the West Coast, but it was in a small neighborhood where most everyone knew everyone around this school. There was a house, not well kept, that everyone said was haunted. It was on the other side of the chain-link fence that surrounded the school grounds from the neighborhood. It was right next to a footpath that led that direction. It was kind of run down, and we never saw anyone in or around it. But the kids at school said that if you tried to walk home via the footpath without an adult with you, the house would swallow you, and you'd become a ghost yourself. They said that there were many children's ghosts in that house, and that they were always on the hunt for more playmates. Cool, but not true. My guess is that the owner of the house probably worked a 9-to-5 job and wasn't home during school hours. Maybe they were too old or too busy to keep with the upkeep of the house. Or maybe it was drugged in, I don't know. But I'll bet a parent or an older sibling came up with that story so that kids wouldn't wander off down that path alone. Kids disappear all the time due to curiosity and evil people, so why not make them too scared to do so? The next example of this was in a Midwestern town that I mostly grew up in. This is where the rest of these stories took place. So, like most little girls, I used to go to sleepovers. It was on 4 different sleepovers that I heard these next stories. The first one I can remember had to do with an attic. I, unlike a lot of people, actually like attics and basements, especially in old houses. They're usually treasure troves of family histories. They're places where the past and the present collide. Yes, they can be dusty and smell a little funny and can even have rodents or spiders, but I like them anyway. On this particular evening, I was at a friend's house and saw the little door that I knew to lead to the attic. I excitedly asked my friend if we could go in, but she quickly told me no and had this look of terror on her face. When I asked why not, she told me that there were hellhounds in the attic. That's right, you heard me, hellhounds. Now I, at the time this took place, was already pretty deep into researching the darker things of life, as I've mentioned in a previous video. I told her that that little door wouldn't be enough to stop a hellhound if it wanted to get in, and I doubted there was a hellhound in there. But she insisted and told me that you can even hear it scratching on the floor above sometimes. I dropped it, and we continued playing. But when I was left alone with her mom at one point of the night, I asked for the real story. Her mom tried telling me it was true and that a neighbor had cursed a family member over a land dispute a long time ago, but that the family member had managed to trap the hound in the attic. But after I brought up a few points about hellhounds and how they actually are supposed to work, she sighed and told me the real reason we couldn't go up there. You see, they had heirlooms up there that included antique guns that may or may not still be loaded. Plus they had mice. Makes sense. More sense than hellhounds, anyway. The next example of this was a basement. Same thing happened. I saw the basement door and asked if we could go in. Friend said no, and that it was haunted. Only this time was a drifter that had broken into the basement through a window while her grandparents owned the house, and he'd hung himself down there. I don't know about you, but I've heard the drifter story before, so I was skeptical. She told me that he had hung himself because he had murdered his wife and kids, and that it had taken weeks for them to find the body, so he was unrecognizable, so they couldn't identify him. So now he was a ghost that would strangle kids if they came downstairs without permission. I had a few problems with the story, so when I was in a situation where I was alone with her dad, I asked him how his parents hadn't smelled the body sooner, since they didn't have AC in the house, and if they didn't know who this drifter was, how did they know that he had killed his wife and children? Surely if he'd bothered to leave a suicide note, he would have identified himself in it. And why did he break into a basement to hang himself when there were plenty of other options? That's when my friend's dad explained that his man cave was down there, and he didn't like the kids coming down whenever they wanted. Why he didn't just put a lock on the door, I'll never know. The third example was an easier one to believe because of the surroundings. I had a friend whose family lived in the middle of a field of corn and some other things. The only way to get to this place was over an old wooden bridge with railroad tracks on it. The only light at night was from their neighbor's front porch, but it was about a block away. She lived in an old, white, 3-story farmhouse that looked like something out of a horror movie, and I was only allowed to stay over there 3 times before my mom said, "No way," to me going back there. Maybe I'll do a video about the things I experienced there. That place was probably haunted or possessed, but I don't know for sure. All I know is that the one ghost story I was provided with was bogus. So the reason for the wooden bridge was that there was a creek that ran under it. It wasn't very deep, maybe 1.5 to 3 feet, depending on what time of year it was, but you couldn't drive through it. My friend and I were walking alongside it when I asked if we could walk through the water. Now, I love water. I always have. If I see it, I want to be in it. But my friend said no. She told me that a little girl had drowned in there at some point, and that her ghost would grab your ankles and pull you down into the water to drown. I have heard stories like this before as well. I asked her how someone was to drown in such low water, even if a child was holding them down. To drown in such low water, this had to be a toddler, and I could fight a toddler at 10 or 11 years old. But she said no, and we went back to her house. Later, I talked with her creepy older brother about it while he was waiting for his turn to shoot cans with a gun. He pointed up the creek a ways to a factory building of some kind. He told me that the waste from that factory was dumped into the creek, and unless I wanted to grow another head or become a mutant, I couldn't swim in the creek. Fair enough, but still, just tell a person that and leave ghosts out of it. The fourth example was a weird one and had to do with a slaughter shed and a grandpa. So I used to sleep over at a friend's house that she shared with her parents, her siblings, and her grandpa, who had Alzheimer's and dementia. When he was present, he was a nice old man that would tell us stories about World War II and how life was back then. He loved to sing Eddie Arnold songs and sometimes even Elvis. He passed away while this friend and I were still friends, and I came over several months after for a sleepover. At one point during the sleepover, her dad needed to go get something he had left behind in this shed-like building they had on their property. They didn't have a large plot of land, but they did have 2 cows and some chickens and a bunch of dogs. I didn't really notice the outbuilding before and asked if we could go explore it. My friend said no, and that Grandpa didn't want us in there. Now, I knew both her grandpas were dead, so I asked what she meant. She then told me that the reason her grandpa had lost his mind and died was because a red-eyed demon had been feeding off of him until he had died, and he became the new red-eyed demon that now lived in the outbuilding and would suck out our memories until we died. Now, I was maybe 11 or 12 when this happened, and it made my head hurt to hear this story. I had spent so much of my life with elderly people and knew what Alzheimer's and dementia was. Plus, I couldn't see her kindly grandpa having been turned into a memory-sucking demon overnight. Surely, if her family knew this was happening, they'd have done something about it. So I cornered her father after he came back and asked him for the truth. He explained that the shed was where he slaughtered their animals when it was their time, and he didn't want his kids in there, sharp objects and all. So he came up with the worst story I've ever heard, demonizing his father-in-law's condition and his memory in the process. Yuck! But the last example of this that I have was when I myself was turned into a ghost story. I may make a video about this story since it's pretty long and involved, but I'll summarize it here. There was a hill that we called Killer Hill when I was a kid. It was a steep hill without much in the way of guardrails and had overgrown trees and cracked pavement. If you went down it on your bike, you would just fly down the hill, and thanks to the kind of brakes that bikes had back then, you wouldn't be able to stop before you hit a very busy road. Most kids got scared and turned into the mobile home park at the bottom of the hill that was just before you hit the main road, so they could slow down. Not me. I went down Killer Hill 5 times and never turned into the park. I was legend. I also moved away from that state a month after the 1997 October North American storm complex. 84 tornadoes and a blizzard blew in and destroyed my Halloween that year. 10 days without power, a third of the trees downed, and the National Guard had to help dig us out. I only bring it up because it features in the story. So probably about 15 years ago, a friend of mine that still lives out there contacted me to tell me a story that her son had told her about Killer Hill. Apparently, Killer Hill has a ghost or an angel that tries to keep kids off the hill. The story is that she was trying to break her record of 5 times down the hill when the big storm hit and she was blown off the hill since there are no guardrails. They didn't find her bike or her body until the snow thawed in the spring. Then they buried her under the hill. So the reason we're pretty sure that this is about me is that up to the big storm, which is what they called the complex, I was the only kid known to have gone down the hill 5 times. It was my record. Also, I moved away just after the storm, so it's fair to say I disappeared after the storm. Plus, my name means angel or messenger of God. So, makes sense. After laughing about it together, I told my friend that this means that somebody in our very small group of friends had made this story up to keep their kid off the hill. Still don't know which one it was, though. After that, I told my friend that if she really wanted to scare her son, she could just go into her yearbook from that year and show a picture of me from that time, then tell him that the reason there isn't any pictures of me in summer clothes is that I disappeared around the time of the storm, and that the record holder of 5 times all the way down Killer Hill was me. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the journey. I'm not sure how often I'll be posting something here, so leave a like, hit the subscribe button and the bell, so you get updated when I do post. If you have questions or want to know more about something I've said, leave a comment and maybe I'll make a video explanation on the subject. But please be polite and courteous with the comments. My feelings don't get hurt, but the world has enough hate and judgment in it. It doesn't need yours on this video. If you think you know who I am, please don't leave a comment guessing my identity. Just send me an email at the address in the description box. Thanks again, and I'll see you when I see you.